I see 21 are already online. So allow me to officially introduce the inaugural Entrepreneurship and Strategy Insights Series. My name is Hanna Milanov. I'm a professor of international entrepreneurship at Technical University of Munich. And I'm delighted that we managed to organize this as a part of the SMS Online Community Initiative. The big idea is that we have a lot of chances to talk to each other during the conferences, but why not try and use the online communication and a bit of brain sharing also in the meantime to make sure that we remain a good online community, not just offline. And in that sense, this is a wonderful pilot, and I am delighted to be having, I think, a very special guest to kick off this series. So some people don't really need a big introduction and are humble in asking for it. So Marc Gruber, Professor of Entrepreneurship and Technology Commercialization at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne, is not only a very well-known researcher to us, an incredible server of our community as the deputy editor of Academy of Management Journal, a great contributor to service at his own university, also as the VP of Innovation, where he's creating some great things. And if he didn't have anything else to do, he also managed to translate a lot of his research into great tools for engaging practitioners and students as well. So he'll be sharing with us some of the insights of how his research informed Where to Play, 3 Steps for Discovering Your Most Valuable Market Opportunities, which he co-authored with Sharon Tal, great friend as well. And as a beautiful testament to the great contribution and impact of this work for practitioners, the Market Opportunity Navigator was recently added by Steve Blank to the Lean Startup Toolset. So we hope to see great impact for that as well. This would be a testament also to the great interest of the community. We've had 103 registrations, I've been told, and I'm sure more people joining as we speak. We are recording the session so that it's available also more broadly for those who couldn't join us live today. And I will only mention that we would welcome your questions and answers at the end of the session. So we'll try to keep a bit of time, maybe 10 minutes, to make sure some of the questions are answered, at least in this medium, and perhaps Marc can welcome some of them later on as well, as I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interest. So I would kindly ask you to use the chat box in the Zoom to ask the questions, and I'll try to collect them and select among them some of those for Marc to address. Marc, with that said, thank you so much for joining us. It's a great pleasure to have you here.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction, Hanna. And it's an honor to be the first one in this new series. Yeah. It's a true innovation, and I'm, as a professor for innovation, I'm excited to join this innovation here. I'm planning to spend like 40 minutes or so on taking everyone on a journey, which started as some observations from a course that I was doing at the University of Munich almost 20 years ago, and that has piqued my research interest ever since. And it's a journey that I was lucky to work with some exciting people. You all know, of course, Ian Macmillan. He was a great friend and mentor, is a great friend and mentor, and he contributed to the research stream that I will present to you. Jimmy Thompson and Sharon Tal, you mentioned her, who wrote the book recently with me. What I've done is engage in an exciting research stream, as I believe, and I'm very passionate about this stream. And that after a while, I started saying, okay, maybe there's a lot of practical implications into what I'm seeing here in my research on our market opportunity identification, beyond the theoretical implications. So this had led Sharon and me to decide a couple of years ago to actually start writing a book. We thought we could do it within 4 months. It took us 2.5 years to finish up the book. But it's now out there, and as you mentioned, it's been adopted by Steve Blank for the Lean Startup Toolset. What I want to do is I prepared a couple of slides that actually guide you through this journey, and I've done so with a couple of thoughts in mind. And in particular, I believe as researchers, we have to stand up a bit more and translate our insights into practical tools that help practitioners, managers, entrepreneurs, innovators actually benefit from the research we're doing. And I think articles are nice and very important to advance knowledge, but they are not as easily accessible, of course, as other types of literature. So in that sense, the little journey I want to take you to is exemplified here in my slides. I hope you can see them now. What you see is that I want to cover 5 main points. First, it's the research that I've been doing with my colleagues that I've just mentioned on market opportunity identification and venture creation. Then take you a bit on this journey from research to a business tool, what this actually meant, and introduce to you the tool that actually originated from it, the Market Opportunity Navigator. I will do so with a small example, and then I show you how this actually maps into the Lean Startup toolset, which is many of you obviously know, with the business model can with minimum viable products, customer discovery. And then I conclude with some ideas for teaching formats, because one element, one critical feature, which is making it a very interesting tool, is that it can create educational value and real business value in a university setting. And this is obviously liked by the students, but also by university administrators and everyone benefiting from technology commercialization, and thus also from the entrepreneurs that can come out of a university. In that sense, such a course that is built on the Market Opportunity Navigator can actually meet a lot of positive interest. And I finish, as Hannah said, with some Q&A, so please type your answers, whatever we cannot cover here during the webinar, I'm happy to cover by email and other fronts. But let me start with an example, and something to motivate the talk and the underlying logic with. You see here the space shuttle heat shield tiles. This is a ceramic tile that is used, of course, with the space shuttle once it comes back from its mission. It should protect the space shuttle from going up in flames. Of course, nowadays the space shuttle doesn't fly anymore, but think about Elon Musk's Falcon rockets having the same type of protective mechanism. This ceramic tile, the ceramic as a material can be applied to the space shuttle. But this can also be applied to catalytic converters, fridges, chimneys. And I found this little Dilbert cartoon that points this out as well as a use case. It says, nose puppies, get your nose puppies. What's a nose puppy? It's a little ceramic puppy that fits in your nose. Find a need and fill it is my motto. Yeah, completely ridiculous. You put a ceramic material into your nose. There might be one customer for this. But what I want to say is that if you put yourself in the shoes of the inventor or of the entrepreneur who tries to commercialize this, this is one type of market where you could do this. But there are others out there. And these markets have very different characteristics. From the Dilbert idea, which is completely ridiculous, up to the catalytic converters, which is a highly contested market, up to the aerospace industry, which is a very particular market as well. The margins are different, the competition levels are different, the fertile ground, if you want to say so, in which you create your company is very different. When I use this now as a startup example, this is a very important question for startups, obviously. For startups, it means you have to understand that your resources are typically fungible. They can address needs in multiple domains. The domain you choose is highly important for your venture in order to create value. Think about these domains that I just mentioned for this material. The value generation possibilities in each of those domains is fairly different. And underlying it, it's already a first learning in the sense that the value does not lie per se in the technology, but it lies in its application towards a customer need. And these application domains have varying degrees of value creation possibility. It's also for new ventures a very intriguing implication is the path dependency that comes along with this market entry decision, because many other decisions are tied to it. Which suppliers you pick, distributors you pick. And it can tell us a lot about opportunity identification. We know from Shane's seminal piece in 2000 a lot about this prior knowledge corridor, that people tend to identify only those opportunities to which they had some prior exposure. But I observed this type of conundrum and the importance actually in a seminar which I was giving, where young entrepreneurs were trying to figure out which domain they should play. And they struggled. And I was intrigued by the paper with Shane that Shane has written, because there each entrepreneur has applied the 3D printing technology to his or her own domain. So there could not be any evaluation of alternative markets. There could not be any evaluation of the potential lying in these different domains. So the inverse question would be, what would happen if ventures would actually identify multiple options ex ante? Would they be able to benefit from this? And secondly, of course, what factors would drive the identification of many more opportunities? Because there is this famous prior knowledge corridor that people only see a snippet of what's out there based on their prior experience. These types of questions have a lot of theoretical importance to drive our understanding of value creation, of resource fungibility, etc., new venture creation more broadly. But it also is as relevant to established firms. Why? Because if you look at the book that I love a lot, it's Penrose's theory of the growth of the firm. She talks about a lot of these elements that I've been alluding to in the new venture space, and links them to the growth patterns that firms can realize. She basically says, look, if you want to understand where firms are growing, you need to understand which type of knowledge the leaders of the firm carry, and that predicts basically the domains in which they will enter. That type of logic, which I abbreviated here a bit, but that type of logic is basically visible in the startup domain when you look at the prior knowledge corridor by Shane. You also see this in the literature discussed in the micro foundations of dynamic capabilities. It's this market sensing ability that Thies has talked about. But this whole question that I've addressed also links to the RBV, to the innovation literature, to organizational learning, corporate renewal and growth literatures. What is particularly intriguing is this concept by Rita McGrath that is linked to it. She says, okay, we are moving from a perspective where we understand industries as the primary playground of firms towards a arena concept where firms actually can move between industries by adding new features, new capabilities to the product. And the underlying question there is, what is actually your opportunity space? What is your arena? And what you see then, if you link those two literatures, the one on established firms and one on new ventures, at the core, the questions are fairly similar. How do you identify good opportunities? What does this mean for your company? And what does it mean ultimately for value generation and growth? So I embarked on this whole journey by saying, okay, this is not only a lucky incidence that people identify opportunities, but there must be something more systematic behind it. And I don't want to go too deeply into the literature. That's well documented. You see the papers out there. And here you see my lovely colleagues who have worked with me in McLynch, James Thompson, Sharon Tal, Irvin Daniels gave great feedback over the years. So what you see here is actually something interesting in a couple of ways, and I just put the figures of the papers there. Here was basically asking in the startup setting, this question that I alluded to earlier: what would happen if a company actually is able, an emerging firm is actually able to see more than one opportunity? Would it have the possibility to actually choose what a better opportunity is, and would it have any performance benefits if it does so? And if that question could be answered with a positive answer, then the next question would obviously be one: how can companies identify these opportunities more systematically and not rely only on chance components? And what you see here is some insights along these lines. We found in a first paper that Macmillan and Jimmy did with me in 2008, which was published in Management Science, which was called Look Before You Leap, that firms that identify multiple uses for their resources actually can outperform those that can only identify a single use. And so there is some ability to benefit from multiple opportunities early on. Not exploiting all of them, of course, but seeing more of them, considering where to enter and where to actually place the target market domain. And then in subsequent papers, we looked at the multiplicity of opportunities, the variety of opportunities. You see how much of the opportunity landscape you can actually see. And this was a very fascinating question. You see this on the bottom right here with this pseudo 3D graph. That's the best of my PowerPoint abilities that you see in action here. But what it basically shows you is the variety of opportunities that you see, with the left bar from 1 to 9 is signaling very narrow opportunity identification, and the right bars signaling very broad opportunity identification. In other words, from a very focused search up to a very distant search. That is evident here. How we would expect that for most firms don't perform a distant search. This is actually visible here. But based on what we see here, which was the first time that we could actually map something like an opportunity identification ability of firms, what we then could look at is the drivers of this variety score or vision distance, as you might say, so which is depicted in the interaction graphs, which I don't get into, but they are, if you are interested, check out the 2013 Oak Science paper that I've written. Chantal joined me as a PhD student late 2009 or so, and then ever since then we have worked together in uncovering more of these questions. One of the findings that she has produced in her dissertation is that actually complements nicely what I've just shown you with the other graphs, is that many startups actually have to pivot from one market to the other. So in her dissertation research, she found that 73% of all startups find initially a market opportunity that is dissatisfying. And that maps quite well with what I've seen, that most startups actually do not look at alternative markets prior to opportunity, prior to launching. And if you put the two things together, you actually see some very interesting insights in the sense that you have an ability to increase firm performance by looking at opportunities, multiple ones, prior to deciding for one, which is actually an activity that serial entrepreneurs do very well. Second, you can benefit from having multiple opportunities by saying, hey, I have future growth options and I have plan Bs in case the first opportunity doesn't work out. So at the end of the day, when you look at the different questions that I've just raised, what we have found is that, number one, it matters to identify multiple opportunities. Number two, you can benefit from selecting them. And number three, it's about then choosing where to enter and how to exploit those opportunities that are becoming key skills. This whole idea set is very relevant for established firms. And let me quickly venture into the established firm domain. Here you see this famous McKinsey 3 Horizons of Firm Growth model, because it's about the core business that you currently have. It's about in building the scaling up of emerging businesses. But in the future, you have to plant the seeds of viable options. And the key question that you want to address in this third horizon is, or the key challenge for this third horizon is to identify and pick great options for the future. And the skill that I just described that is underlying what I've seen in the startup setting, the skill to see more options, the skill to select the options, the skill to understand the opportunity landscape in the end of the day, is one that is underpinning this Horizon 3 challenge that firms are facing. So this is how it actually maps into the established firm area. What we're seeing here is big picture marriage between entrepreneurship, innovation, and strategy, if you want to add technology commercialization to it as well. That is driving these insights, and that is driving, obviously, when you look outside, the success of many contemporary ventures. This is very evident when you see, for instance, what currently is happening, and just motivated with some concrete examples. You have watch manufacturers who are realizing that by adding sensors to their watches, they can become medical device companies. Yeah. This is happening, in the was an example here as illustrated in the taxi business, but it's no longer a taxi business, it's actually a food delivery business. And if you look in the Silicon Valley, it's actually a business where Uber got into tourism industry because they're doing Uber wine, they're doing wine tours with their cars, which is actually not such a bad idea to have a driver when you're tasting wine at the vineyards. But what it shows you here, and what it's, and what you have seen here with a watch example, what it tells you at the end of the day is that, look, firms nowadays have growth opportunities that are enabled by putting intelligence into your capability set, by adding AI, by adding sensors, etc., that enable you to move almost seamlessly from one domain to another without by building on their core competence. What is underlying this are several insights. For Uber, it's an insight to say, hey, we have growth options beyond our initial domain. We can grow in many other fields. So if you want to say so, what we see here is 3 options that Uber has recognized, 3 opportunities that Uber has recognized. The opportunity landscape for Uber is much wider. So the question that arises here is what is this opportunity landscape for Uber? What is the opportunity landscape for a watch manufacturer? This might be one medical device. We can also move into the fitness area, etc. So the underlying point is one where we combine an entrepreneurial insight, where can I potentially play, what are my opportunities, with then an execution insight, okay, how can I exploit these opportunities? And this is more on the managerial side. Another example where you see this very nicely is the example of Daimler and Apple. Apple gets into cars. There's no one forcing Apple to do so. Apple basically has discovered this opportunity for them alongside many others. You know, they have not been born as a car manufacturer, quite to the contrary. That's a very new domain for them. But they can build on a set of competences, you know, that they have developed with the iPhone, with the iPad. Think about the App Store. Many of these IT competences, the App Store will be relevant in a self-driving car. And of course, they have new competences they need to add. And likewise for Daimler, the game is one where you say, okay, I have my traditional competence that I need to upgrade with autonomous driving, e-mobility capabilities, but I need to develop all these new competences as well that are required to have the autonomous cars, so they have to become IT companies too. What we see here is already linking the RBV to an opportunity identification perspective, market sensing perspective, as Thies would say. But more generally, what we see is there's an entrepreneurial insight in the beginning. It's about opportunities. It's about the opportunity landscape. It's also a cognitive flexibility that is present with these companies, which makes it quite interesting from a theoretical and practical perspective. Why? Because the companies that are very aggressive out there, proactive in what they want to achieve, are companies that do no longer look at industries, but they look at arenas. And that's the concept of Rita McGrath that I was alluding to early on. She says basically, look, we are moving from an industry perspective, which is well known in the strategy domain, where it's about positional advantage, where it's about market share, where the various intra-industry moves, you know, one computer manufacturer worrying about another, where likely acquisition behavior is within industry. The second largest firm buys the third largest firm, it becomes the larger firm of the largest firm of the industry. We are moving from this type of worldview, where we have lots of tools. Think about Porter's 5 forces and all the tools he developed. Think about other tools that help you to understand an industry and its competitiveness and the competitiveness of firms within an industry, to a world where we are looking at arenas. And take these examples that I've just given as an illustration. We look at this world of arenas where it's about capturing territory. Uber is capturing territory. The measure of success is not as clear here. It's market share in the industry setting, but here it's the share of the potential opportunity space. It's granted, it's a very fluffy concept because it's also very subjective. But that should not be an excuse not to think that way. Well, you can use it as an excuse not to think that way, but then you know, the company is not on any growth path. But if you look at Uber or this watch manufacturer that I gave you as an example, they are looking at very proactively at the potential opportunity space and say, okay, these are areas I can grow in by leveraging my core capabilities, adding some new features to them, and being competitive in these new arenas. It's about, and let me go quickly through the slide, it's about not within industry acquisition of capabilities, but new capability acquisition. Now think about Apple trying to become a car manufacturer. This has a lot of managerial challenges associated with it to acquire new capabilities. But what we see here when we are moving from left to right, from industry to an arena perspective, is a major challenge in understanding the opportunity space. Yeah, the second line here, this share of the potential opportunity space, where I said, look, this is a fluffy concept. How can we make this more attractive? How can we make this more systematic? And basically, that's where my research trajectory, when you look at what I've done before on new ventures, where I just showed you the scope of opportunities new ventures can see, the scope of opportunities that in an analogous way large firm companies could see. This enables us to have a more systematic view of the types of opportunities firms can see, the types of opportunities particular individuals can see or teams can see. And once we understand that more systematically, we can actually get our hands on understanding the share or the potential opportunity space, and then ultimately the share of the opportunity space that a firm exploits. So if we are adopting this perspective now, you know, what I've done is to say, okay, to move actually from research to a business tool to provide an answer to this question, you know, what is the opportunity space of a company? And that's where I joined with Sharon to write the book Where to Play that some of you might have encountered already. This is a book that takes a very practical perspective. It's deliberately a very visual tool. It's a tool that can be used in the classroom, but also in companies to answer this question, what is my opportunity space? You see this with this icon down there. It's this little shopping bag, you know, what are the opportunities you see? The second one, what are good opportunities? You see this with the 2x2 matrix where we evaluate opportunities. And then the third icon signifies a dart board where you say, okay, in the middle, these are my target opportunities. I have some that I observe and some that I put away. This is the outer ring. I will walk you through this process in the next few minutes. I will do so with lots of examples, but let me highlight one particularly important feature. There is the main setup of the framework is shown here. You have the Market Opportunity Navigator. You have first, on a very practical perspective, the opportunity set that you are trying to develop, the shopping bag or the suitcase on the left. You have the rating, the evaluation of the opportunities in terms of their potential and their challenge level in the middle. And then you have the agile focus dartboard on the right side. But behind each of these 3 steps, there is a worksheet. And why is there a worksheet? Because this is actually, if you want to do it right, not such a trivial question. It has to do with your understanding of your resources. It has to do with your creativity, to understand where new market spaces are. It has to do with evaluating the potential opportunities, all under uncertainty. I come back to that later on. And then trying to understand a portfolio. And a portfolio has relationships, so you need to understand how related your options are ultimately, which then enables you in a third step to create your agile focus. You focus on one opportunity in a startup setting or focus on multiple opportunities in a large company setting. I will walk you through this example with a firm, with a venture that came out of my school here in Lausanne, Flyability. And let me show you a little video that is visible here. Let me see if I can switch to the other monitor. Here we go. Zoom. Sorry for the technology glitch here. I need to switch. Maybe the office staff can help me here. I cannot access my other slide. Let me see. Here we go. Share, new share. Here we go. Now I figured it out. Sorry for the delay. I show you the screen here. This is the flyability example. And let me quickly show you 1 minute of that video to give you some. Oh, sorry, that is not. There we go. That's not the right one. Yeah, this is the one. You see here the drone. It's a drone in a cage. And you can see this drone as an example for any type of bundle of resources and producing a product here. Features a full HD camera and a thermal camera embedded on the drone. It has several features here. It has this camera. It can be remotely controlled. It can inspect things. It has a live digital video feed, as you see here. Gather close-up images for high-resolution data with a sub-millimeter resolution. Onboard LED lighting system and a complete remote control of the camera settings allows to navigate and inspect even in pitch-dark environments. Changing batteries won't take seconds. Just unplug the used one. 20 more seconds. You're getting the overall impression what it can do. This is a drone that also can inspect, can fly close to humans, and it can look at all these different tanks, try to inspect them if there are cracks, etc. Let me move back to the slides. So let's use this example actually to motivate the bigger question that I was pointing out. You know, this is about the opportunity space. This is about the arena flyability can play in. This is about trying to understand the different options, opportunities that flyability has, answering basically the where to play question. What is a good fertile ground for flyability to enter? And then the obvious next question is then, you know, how can flyability exploit its application in that particular domain? And I mentioned that, you know, you have a three-step process, and I walk you briefly through this three-step process with by pointing out to the worksheets that help you ask the right questions. These worksheets are based on research, on our research, on my research, and others' research. What you see here is the first worksheet that should help you to identify the opportunity landscape. And this is a worksheet where it's divided into two main parts. On the upper part, you talk about your abilities, you discuss the competencies of the venture, of the firm. It can be an established firm, it can be a venture. In the flyability case, we had a couple of abilities. It is unique accessibility, it's aviation abilities, and imagery system, which can be broken down into left to right, the collision tolerance. It's as a decoupled light protection case. It rules on any surface, operates in a range of temperatures. It can fly, the aviation abilities. It has on-site video piloting. It has an imagery system. You saw that as well, real-time video streaming, thermal recording, HD recording. All are enabled, also post-mission analysis. This is a competence view, ability view of the flyability drone. This is described independently of any application or a market opportunity, because it should not constrain you in any way. You know, what you're doing right now in terms of an application, in terms of the opportunity to exploit, it should not constrain your view of other possibilities. So this is deliberately described in an independent way. In the next step, the challenge is to see where these types of abilities are needed to serve customer needs. And that's where you typically engage in a brainstorming session in a team. If the venture team is heterogeneous, that's what my research has shown, that of course the application potential, the opportunity landscape that you see is much wider than if your team is very homogeneous in terms of industry background. So one driver of seeing more opportunities is definitely heterogeneity in backgrounds of people with different industries. This is oftentimes not the case in startups, where it's homophily that is driving startup team creation. This might be more easily achievable in larger companies, where you break the silos and bring people together to really brainstorm jointly. But what you see here is basically on the bottom part is the different application areas that flyability has seen. They were brainstorming, so they saw, well, oil, gas, storage tanks and power plants. This can be used to inspect the thermal boilers. The drone flies up, looks at the boiler, makes a tour, records it, etc. The maritime domain, when we move from the industrial inspection to the infrastructure inspection, it's the open air facilities, indoor facilities. It's security, search and rescue. When you look at to the people space, the police can use it to have surveillance of events, of demonstrations, etc. The military can use it, rescue forces can use it, firefighters can use it, etc., etc. What this already tells you here is, look, this is not a one-trick pony, this company. This company is actually able to do many things. And this is now opening up this other question that I motivated early on with a research question, but now it's a very practical question here. Well, now we have seen multiple options. Can we actually pick one that is a better one? Can we actually choose a more fertile ground for firm creation? And can we actually use the multiplicity to somehow look at it in a more dynamic way and say, hey, maybe we should enter one of these domains and then use others as future growth options, or if it doesn't work out, as a plan B. So what flyability has been doing here is big picture, an assessment of what they are able to do, their competencies, and bringing it then into the market domains that they could potentially look at. This reminds you of the examples I've given earlier. You can put the Uber example in here, Uber being present in many, having certain competencies, being present in many other domains. It doesn't have to be a technology venture. You can apply this to your own human competences. I will end later on my talk with giving you the example of one of the journalists who interviewed me, who said basically he put his competences in there. So at the next step, once you have seen this range, this opportunity landscape, the question is, how do you actually move from the opportunity set, the different options in the back, here the top 5 for liability, into an assessment what is better and not so good. The goal is to place each option along the potential and the challenge dimension into this 2x2 matrix that you see in the middle that we call the attractiveness map. So we move from a set of options to one where you put order into them by looking at challenge and potential. That gives you 4 different quadrants. If we move from the top right, high challenge, high potential, it's the moonshot quadrant. It's the Elon Musk quadrant, as I like to call it, because Elon Musk is only doing what's up there. You have high challenge and low potential. These are the questionables, type of suicide quadrant, if you want to say so. You have low challenge and low potential, which is the quick wins. And then you have some which are actually quite interesting. These are the gold mines. They truly exist. It's high potential and low challenge. So how do you figure this out? Here worksheet 2 comes into play. You basically look at your opportunities and rate them. Of course, this happens under uncertainty, so there is never a perfect rating. Yeah? But this makes, the worksheet gives you 2-3 advantages towards just the gut feeling. Why? Number one, it makes you more complete in what you look at. We looked at 40 to 50 years of venture capital evaluation research in order to come up with these dimensions. Trust me, that was a lot of work that Sharon and me engaged in to figure out the dimensions that we could distill from that literature and to make it a practical tool. You see on the potential side, we have the compelling reason to buy, the market volume, and the economic viability that will decide for the overall potential. So that is not a perfect linear equation, but as I mentioned, the key benefit here is that you are more systematic in your assessment and roughly have the overall potential, the y-axis, as high. This is the power plant thermal boiler example from Flyability that we just looked at, and you can imagine easily how the drone flies around this thermal boiler, inspects it, and broadcasts the video down to the monitor and the person observing it, which is much more efficient and effective than a person climbing up a ladder and looking at the thermal boiler. That's the potential dimension. On the challenge side, we have also 3 main dimensions. It's implementation obstacles, the time to revenue, and also the external risk, everything you cannot control, which is beyond your sphere of influence. Think about the Libra currency that Facebook tries to launch. If the government says, okay, we don't want this, this is an external risk that cannot be controlled. Overall, this again gives you an overall challenge score. And I mentioned that uncertainty plays a role here, but what is interesting to observe and what we tend to forget in entrepreneurship is that not all opportunities are equally uncertain. Or put differently, once you do this, you realize that some opportunities might not be so uncertain at all, and that can become a decision criterion in and of itself. Flyability did this with these 5 opportunities, and they came up with the following portfolio. We have one gold mine opportunity, the power plants, the thermal boilers, which is their best opportunity in that sense, but they have also some out there, the moonshots, which require more resources, contain more challenge, but have also a high potential. And then you have some that are more questionable, the power plants and the nuclear rooms, where it's very difficult to enter. In the third step, you take this portfolio and try to understand where should I focus. And there the method is not one that is mandating you to pick the gold mine. You can pick very well the questionable or a moonshot. It depends on what you like, where your passion is. Maybe your passion is truly with the questionables. But that would then say, okay, maybe it's not such a great choice, but if your passion is there, then maybe you want to go there and devote more energy to it, more resources in order to maybe be able to change that opportunity to a better one. But the question arises, once you know your preferred opportunity, what do you do with the others? And by seeing a multiplicity, you have suddenly not only more options, but it provides you with a more dynamic venture creation path. Because as I mentioned, a one-trick pony, you can do many more things. And venture capitalists love this because you can actually benefit from multiple revenue sources, value creation sources over time. And you can also say, okay, I have the growth potentials, but I also have a plan B should the first option not work out. And that's what worksheet 3 helps you to figure out. You have, it's actually quite a simple worksheet. because there's only three things you need to do. Number one, you anchor it, your main opportunity. Number two, you are, this is the power plants, thermal boilers. This is what Flyability chose. You are picking the other ones you're putting the other ones in second row that you have identified. These are 3 out of the 4 others. And then you try to understand how these options that you've seen are related. So the main dimensions are product relatedness and market relatedness that help you to understand if you move from option 1 to opportunity 1 to opportunity 2, how difficult is this? How many resources do you need? Here, power plant, thermal boilers, and oil gas storage tank inspection with the drones are fairly similar in terms of products, even more similar in terms of market. So this would be a fantastic growth option. So we definitely keep this option open, as you see at the bottom of the sheet. Maritime vessel inspection, the product relatedness is very close. You can basically take the same product. Market relatedness is not so close, but this might be also a good growth option. Police surveillance, product relatedness is there, market related is not there at all. So if the first markets, which are quite close, should not work out, this might be a very good secondary option, plan B, that you can move into. What you see with the underlying the logic that I've just explained is already, I think, an important insight. Number one, once you have this multiplicity of opportunities, you are more careful in choosing maybe a brand name. You don't call this company drone inspection of nuclear power plants.com. Once you realize that you can do many more things, you might want to pick a name like Flyability, because that enables you to do many of these other things as well. Second, it helps you for patenting. Third, it helps you to make good hiring decisions. It just creates a more dynamic and more agile view of what you want to do. So this is the Navigator, how it operates. You can apply this in the new firm setting. You can apply this to a large company setting. I've done so. And you can apply this, of course, in the classroom. It has been, and Hannah mentioned it just a few minutes ago, adopted because of its unique contribution in the Lean Startup toolset. And let me briefly point out what Steve Blank has written earlier this year on his blog post. He basically said, look, what we have in the Lean methodology is basically tools that help you to understand rapidly product market fit inside a market and how to pivot when your hypotheses are incorrect. But these tools that have been in the Lean methodology didn't even really help you to figure out where to start the search for a new business. And this is what the Market Opportunity Navigator is actually doing. I invite you to read this blog post. If you type in your browser target market roulette Steve Blank, you will find it immediately. But the main point that he suggested here is depicted on this figure. It's about understanding not only the bottom part, where it's about figuring out a business model for a product in a certain market. It's not only about customer validation. It's not only about agile development of products, the minimum viable product as a concept, but there is something more we can add to this learning. It's a bit of a wider lens where we say, hey, is the domain in which we want to play actually the more favorable one? Are there better ones out there? So that we don't spend all this effort, don't spend all this worry, even these resources on an inferior domain. And as we have seen throughout the research that I've done, as we have seen now, Sharon and I, with all the practical examples that companies that we work with, there is a huge value actually in figuring out a useful market, a good market, a promising market in a first step, questioning, in case you already have a market, questioning if that is actually a good one or maybe there are better ones out there, and then engaging in all the other steps afterwards. And as you see, this is a learning cycle. This is not, you might err in your target market choice, but then you have a plan B already in store. And given that you are, have seen it before, you might have already chosen a brand name that provides you more flexibility. You have a patenting strategy that provides you with more flexibility. Maybe you have a plug-and-play product that provides you with more flexibility. The main point being, the tool here fits nicely in a suite of other tools that are useful in modern innovation management and help to understand and navigate this arena concept that we mentioned before. I briefly pointed out that we have worked in a couple of teaching formats to implement this, and this actually then will conclude my talk, and then I open it up for Q&A. We have used it in many different settings with entrepreneurs, with students in entrepreneurship innovation, in strategy courses, even a marketing course. It's used by now in many places around the globe. Let me show you what type of formats I came across, what I heard from other colleagues that worked with the Market Opportunity Navigator. So there are standalone formats. These can range from 20 minutes to a day, depending on how hands-on they should be, where you can work with technology transfer offices. You can work with incubators, startup trainings to understand, for technologies that are there, how they can be applied. This could be a workshop for startups or nascent entrepreneurs where you actually work with them half a day to 6 days, depending on how hands-on that should be. When you think about a collaboration with the TTO at your university, you can say, okay, this is a tool that actually creates educational value, because you understand this early stage entrepreneurial process, opportunity identification much better, and it creates business value in the sense that there's a tangible outcome after the course that these emerging technologies that you work with actually can create value for different constituencies. This helps the inventors to commercialize. This helps the TTO to write their patents, etc. Then there is beyond the standalone formats, you can also say, okay, there are formats in which you work on the technology, develop insights on the market, and then move it into a business modeling challenge. We did a course at TUM. My colleague Sharon did one earlier this year where it was about technologies out of the school. And you see here that was a 6-day course where you initially looked at what the main conceptual challenges are. Then you were generating the opportunity set with the teams, evaluating those opportunities, designing the agile focus strategy, and then reaching out to other business model canvas, value proposition canvas, the lean startup method. And you can put in guest lectures in this. If you want to look at this more closely, the slides are available for you. And then you can say this is plug and play with your existing courses. You might have an entrepreneurial course, an innovation course, a strategy course. For all of them, opportunity identification of growth options is important. The word to play question is one that is highly important, especially in the strategy domain since 20, 30 years, 40 years even. But the tool was missing so far. You can therefore create a setting where students can learn a business tool that helps them to answer this important question. It's a plug and play, therefore, with many of the existing teaching formats and course offerings in these domains. And as you said, if you're running a lean startup toolset course, this can be directly incorporated as a front-end step. And I mentioned, just to conclude before I open that up for Q&A, I motivated a lot with tech examples. But when Frank, a journalist, called me up and said, Marc, we want to do an interview, he said, look, I used the Market Opportunity Navigator. I understood better what type of competences I had. And I realized, look, I'm a business journalist. I have great competences in writing, in presenting. I know the latest business trends. I have a fantastic network. And beyond actually being a business journalist, enables me to do conferences, to host conferences about business topics, charge for these conferences, and actually do like 2-3 times a year a business conference on a very hot topic, and therefore enlarge my scope of activities. And some of these options are, maybe even more fruitful to engage in than the journalism business. So Frank used his own set of competences. So in some sense, I never thought I'd write a self-help book, but in a way it is, because it also can resonate with yourself and the competences you're having. This concludes my conversation and my brief presentation. What we have a couple of pointers to you. The book is available in a couple languages. If you're watching from China, it's in Chinese. If you're watching from Germany, it's in German. If you're looking in France, it's in French. We soon have a Spanish version. Please join our online course on edX. We have a mailing list at where2play.co, important, not .com, .co, where we provide you with additional material, lots of free stuff. There's nothing where you have to pay. And you can, of course, contact me for more questions. Let me move over to Hannah, stop the slides, and open up for questions, because I think there might be some. We have about 10 minutes left to do so. Thank you.
Wonderful. Marc, thank you so much for not only giving sort of the big picture of this work in terms of research and the broader research conversations in entrepreneurship and strategy for that matter, but also the applicability. The first question is from Carolyn Decker, who said, does this tool also work in online learning environments? And I think you just pointed out it. Obviously, you have an edX course and lots of wonderful examples of videos. Is there anything else you want to add in terms of best practices online versus offline in this regard?
Yeah, so what we do is, online learning in two ways. Number one, there's online tutorials. There's a Train the Trainers online course where people can adopt, understand how they can apply the tool and coach student teams, become consultants on this front, because it's also a great tool if you want to do consulting to companies, given the importance of the question. And then what we're currently working on is an app version to it, so that you soon can you do what you have seen on the paper sheets and say, okay, I automatically can move, if I identify the markets, I value them, that it shows up directly on your Opportunity Navigator to make it more interactive. But we started with the paper version, and now we have the sophisticated app version soon. Okay,
so keep an eye on it altogether. I think other questions are emerging similarly in terms of just applications in different contexts. So one question that emerged now is, have you used an executive training? And on my end, I think a similar question would be, obviously, first of all, thank you and Sharon for doing the course at Technical University of Munich. We loved it. But coming from a tech university, this is, I think, of course, as a matter of fact, something you would want to do. Perhaps in a more traditional business school setting or other settings, how would you approach this? Where not students maybe don't have technology in hand with all the features, but would still want to be well versed with this kind of a tool to approach tech teams.
I think it's a fantastic question. I think one where it resonates a lot with the executive audience in a number of ways. Number one, what my experience is that executives struggle to figure out where technology can be applied in their businesses, and this tool enables you to get it hands-on, have a hands-on approach to figure out where technology can help you to conquer new market space, new growth space. So in that sense, what you need to challenge executives is, in the first place, is to say, okay, we now need to think more broadly about what our company can be. Because if you have been working in a company for 30 years, or think about that watchmaker that I showed a couple of minutes ago, these companies might be working in their domain for 300 years. So the first thing that you have to push executives to is to say, okay, let's just think about our competencies, and not necessarily where they have been applied, but adopt more maybe the mindset of Uber or the other watchmaker, where you see new growth space in other domains. So it's first about generating cognitive flexibility, and then taking them along on this journey where they can look at multiple, identify opportunities, make that in a playful way in teams, pitch their ideas, and then come back with tangible outcomes in the end. So it works extremely well with the executives once you push them to think, allow them to think across their own boundaries, the industry logics that they might possess.
Yeah, we did teach them a lot in the Porterian way, right? So I've also seen in my own experiences that this Porterian lens of sticking to the industry is something that is very strong. In that sense, we have another question which I think would go towards sort of evaluating the attractiveness of the opportunities. And I will complement the actual question, which is about how much to really rely on tangible numbers in validating these opportunities, right? So how much of an Excel mindset to have in it. My question would complement that, and it would be, from my own experience, I've noticed that people often sort of come with a very Shane prior knowledge mindset into it. And although they recognize some of the opportunities, there's this fear of, how do I even think about approaching the police, or to put it in the context of liability, or how do I even approach the military? My goodness, this is not something for us. So where do you put the numbers, and where do you put the team current competencies within the attractiveness gap?
So very pertinent questions, and I think that's when we work with the startups or with large enterprise, we see these challenges. What you have with worksheet 2 is a systematic way of saying, hey, these are the core features, core characteristics that I need to understand. So you are, the first benefit, and I mentioned briefly in the talk, is that you are more comprehensive. Instead of saying, oh, that's a great opportunity because the market size is great, which you sometimes hear. You just need to go through these different. Second, and that's coming now directly to your question, now how much information do you have to have there? Of course, we are moving into the innovation space, and there are some very nascent emerging markets where it's really tough to point your finger exactly on where it should be. But you have a rough idea at least, and the rough idea is better than just some wild guess that you don't, is this a small market? Is this a large market? Is it, that's why we deliberately didn't put numbers on these bars. It goes from low to super high, because there's also different market sizes, different ambitions of people. So it might be, we have deliberately designed the tool so that that you don't have to have the numbers. Of course, if you can do backup research and make these numbers more solid, if there's evidence out there, and I mentioned that opportunities differ in terms of the level of uncertainty. If you have less uncertain ones, more certain ones, there's much more statistics out there. You should plug those in. There is some desk research, number one, and some I need to see the customers go outside the building, and that's where Steve Blank and his customer discovery process comes in. You need to push yourself and say, hey, I approach these vendors or these markets and try to understand the customers in them.
And I think this brings us also from the capabilities logic into the next question that I wonder if you're going to have time to really answer, given its depth. So I think it was addressed to all the panelists and maybe serves as a good bridge to have a conversation continue between entrepreneurship and strategy going forward, which is effectively where do we bring in the diversification literature from strategy into all of this? Maybe going back to your watch example, right? The core capability of wearability versus adding sensors to it is another to Uber, who's driving and having vehicles everywhere and then just needs to pick up different goods. And how does one even balance it well that you don't overstep your capabilities and get burned too far away from the core? And I don't know if you can have some.
No, but I think that's a very good question. Actually, part of the paper that I've written in 2013, the Doc Science paper, if you want to look it up, the person who asked that question, we look at what opportunities ventures identify and then what opportunities they enter. And what we see is actually there's an inverse U-shaped relationship between distance of an opportunity and likelihood to entry. So the ventures would enter as a next growth option, diversify into a market that is not far out in the distance, but at the middle distance. So if you have in terms of distance relationship, you don't enter the ones that are too close because they are probably as maybe badly performing as where you were, or similar performance, but there might be others that are a bit removed from you, have a bit of distance, and we measured that with the SIC codes. If you want to look at the methods, it's very well documented there. But it's then less likely if you move into domains that are further out, which resembles this logic of saying, if I venture out too far, the riskiness gets higher, my resource expenditures will be higher. But it's very relevant. It ties perfectly into the diversification literature too.
Which just brings me to a wonderful conclusion that this, I think, from my end at least, was a wonderful choice to have you speak to us, because not only do you bridge the top research with impact as we speak, but also entrepreneurship and strategy, core dilemmas from back in the days from RBV and the growth dilemmas to the exciting new landscape of opportunities ahead of us.
Hannah, there's a question that we are facing because I think some participants are joining right now, like Elena. Okay. Hi, Elena from Los Angeles. I think it is recorded now, no? And then people can look at it now. Correct.
So the session is recorded. I am really sorry if there was any time zone hiccups. We tried to find a time that's as broadly applicable across the globe. Of course, we couldn't cover all the zones perfectly, but I think what we'll able to do is definitely we'll have it online for people to revisit. Thank you so much for the openness for having people contact you. Should there be follow-up questions, you certainly gave us a lot of resources to work with in terms of edX and other links, and the book is there in so many languages. I think what I would close with is we'll definitely try to follow up this pilot if the community is excited with another one. So we might be sharing a little bit of a very short survey to see what the people really enjoyed and how to best follow up with these kinds of engagements. And again, thank you all for joining us. Sorry if there was any kind of an Outlook hiccup. And Marc, again, my deepest appreciation. It was a wonderful session. I certainly learned a lot.
Thank you.
And,
let me thank you, Hannah, for inviting me to this first session. We will make the slides also available, and everything you can look at it, online, wordtoplay.co as well for many additional features. But thank you very much, everyone, and take good care. If you have questions of applying it, don't be shy to reach out to me. Happy to do so. Bye-bye, Hannah. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. We'll be following up with the information on the link for the recording and everything else. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.